Hey everybody, this is Ryan Cozy with the Chapel. I hope and pray that everybody is doing well this summer. I hope everybody had a great 4th of July weekend. And as we get started back into this new work week, I wanted to take just a few minutes of your time. And over the summer, I'm just trying to pick on a couple of subjects that I feel like are things that we really want to be pushing toward in our circle group communities. And it's not just in our circle group communities, but that's a domain that I have responsibility for. And so these are some things that I would really love to see and hear and experience more of, and just from the sake of personal testimony of what God is doing in the life of the circle groups that exist at our church. Whether you participate at Lockport, at Cheektowaga, or at Crosspoint, this is a DNA that we're trying to see come to life, come to fruition in the life of our circle groups. And so the topic that I'd like to talk about just for a few minutes today is about engaging lostness as a group. And one of the things that people have asked me in this process of engaging lostness, and you'll know that if you've gone through the discipleship material, that's really the second half of our discipleship resource. Is a great work done by Pastor Jim Murphy, who was at Missio Church in Syracuse, and he's now at Clear Creek Community Church in Houston, Texas. But he's a part of a network of pastors that we're affiliated with, and he has done an amazing job at trying to help people encounter lostness just in the everyday life that they live. And so if you haven't taken the time to go through the discipleship resource, I'd strongly encourage you to do that. And if you would like to go back and get a refresher on this, I would encourage you to look at the sessions that come after the outcomes section. So probably sessions 5 to the end. That's really the missional edge portion of what we're trying to do in the discipleship resource. But one of the first things that I would just recommend is just taking stock, even as an individual, but even as a group, of the relationships that you have around you. And so that really hits on two things. Number one, it hits on your sphere of influence, and it hits on your geography of influence. Let me explain what I mean when I say that. Number one, the sphere is, look, you have coworkers, you have neighbors, you have friends, you have a variety of people around you that are in your life for one particular reason or another. It may be a hobby, it may be a blood relationship, it may be through any number of reasons. But that's what we call our sphere of influence, the relationships that God has given you in wherever it is that you go. And a lot of people, when they start talking about engaging lostness, it's one of the first things that they forget is that God has placed you in a number of relationships in and throughout your life. And it seems like that's the first thing that we forget about when we try to go engage lostness, is we just begin to start interacting with strangers. And that's not a bad thing, but when we don't think about the relationships that God has set forth before us in our sphere of influence, that seems to be problematic, and we probably need to focus in on that a little bit more. And so I can, just from a personal standpoint of testimony, I think about, for me, it was my father and my brother and my sister. That was an immediate sphere of influence where I thought, I'm pretty sure they don't know Jesus, and I want them to know Jesus. So what is that? What is my responsibility for where they're at in their life, and what can I do to make a difference, to make a meaningful difference in their life, and bring the truth of the gospel into their life? And I'll just be the first to say that I think I did some things well. I think I did a number of things poorly, but I was efforting. I was really trying to bring the truth of the gospel into the life of people that were in my sphere of influence. And at a young age, that manifested itself positively and negatively. But I'm still grateful for the fact that God helped me to take a bold step. The second domain of influence would be our geography of influence. And those would be just neighbors. When we look around, I live in a very kind of a tightly compacted group of homes are in my community. We don't have big yards. It's one of those kinds of neighborhoods that if you're getting upset with your kids, you're a little bit worried that the neighbors might be hearing, or heaven forbid you ever have an argument with your spouse that maybe somebody else is listening because they're within 18 inches of your window. So it's that kind of a tightly knit set of homes, and it's a great community. But what I find is that this is a struggle for a number of people, that they've not taken the time to engage their geography of influence, and they don't know where to start. And so I would just say and encourage you all to ask God to help you with this. Think about the things that your neighbors are doing. Think about the times when they're out, and just think about just little conversations that you can have with them. I think about just for my neighborhood, I felt very anxious at the very beginning of moving there, almost 7 years ago now. Just like, oh, we got to make a difference. We got to make a difference, and I think we have made a difference. But I think that it's a lot slower. But the process, if you're faithful to it, a number of little things add up, and they do allow for very meaningful conversations, laughing with neighbors, bearing burdens with neighbors, crying with neighbors. These are things that are very meaningful in the life of people that you live close by. And you'd be amazed at how, if you can be faithful in little things, that when big things come, there's an opportunity for you. And hopefully you'll make much of Jesus in that opportunity. Specifically, if they talk about, just not knowing about what might be after this life, or if they're going through a trial, how do you find hope? It's my prayer and it's my hope that people that call the chapel home would be very clear that the hope that they have is a hope in an empty tomb, a hope in a resurrected Christ. And hopefully your life in those little things will represent that well, to have a meaningful conversation with your neighbors. I think two more things that I would just share. I know it's a little bit longer, but I want to do these each, maybe every week or two throughout the summer, just because I think they're very important things that leaders need to be praying about and need to be thinking about if you're going to lead other people. The third thing is, really believe that God is moving in and throughout this world, and that He wants you to join Him. This is right out of Henry Blackaby's book, Experiencing God. If you've not done that yourself as a leader, I'd strongly encourage you to walk through Blackaby's book, Experiencing God. It's a workbook / Bible study, and it is a transformative study, in my opinion. It's one of the great ones. I've gone through it a couple of times in my journey of following Christ, once very early on as a new believer, and it was great then, and I went through it a couple years ago, and it was fantastic, even a couple years ago, after almost 15, 16 years of following after the Lord. But Blackaby talks about, look, you don't need to conjure up God's movement in the world. What you need to do is you need to be in tune with God's movement, that He's already moving. And you need to identify where it is that He's moving, and you need to join Him. And I would say that the foundational component of that, what that comes down to in your own life, is, are you pursuing intimacy with God? Now, you're leaders of circle groups, and I think that there's this hope or this belief that people that are leading circle groups, they're being real serious with their time with the Lord. That if we're going to try to lead other people to mobilize and reach every man, woman, and child in this region, it requires that the leaders themselves are practicing intimacy with God, and that's being put on display. It's being modeled well in small group community. And I really hope and I pray that that's something that's going on in your life. And if it's not, and you need help with it, I'd love to talk with you. I'd love to be a source of help for you. It requires time spent with God to be in tune with what He's doing in this world. It's not something that you can just microwave and have in 30 seconds. It takes time. And so I would just encourage you to make sure that intimacy with God is a priority in your own personal spiritual formation, but that it would also be a priority in your ability, in your understanding that your ability to lead really goes as far as close as you are to the Lord. And I think that that's a really important thing. It's a heavy responsibility, but it's my hope and my prayer that you'll understand that and take that on as a circle group leader at the chapel. And then finally, I would just say in closing that when we try to engage lostness, I talked about being aware of the relationships that are around you in your sphere of influence, relationships with coworkers and family members, etc. I talked about your geography of influence. I've also talked about having a sincere belief that God is moving in and throughout the region. He's moving. You don't need to question that. You need to find out where He's moving. You need to join Him in that. And my belief is that He's moving in your neighborhood, and He's moving in your spheres of influence, and you need to pay attention to those things, those gospel opportunities, to be present and to give proclamation and to live in the hope that people will come to know Jesus. The final thing is just the understanding that it takes time. One of the great teachable moments that I'm personally having in my neighborhood is just in a number of little things over the years. It's been almost 7 years of living there, and it's just now that I'm starting to see the fruit of our trying to neighbor well. And it's allowed us to have some great conversations. It's allowed us to share the gospel on a handful of occasions, and we're really excited about that. I had a friend come by my office just yesterday, and he and his wife are just great examples to me. And they've been participating in fostering. And a situation emerged where a family, a child that they had been fostering, they were brought back in contact with that child and that child's biological father. And through a series of events, that relationship it has the potential to start up again. And dad is doing well, and child is doing okay. But the reality is they invested in this child through fostering. And they drip-fed the presence of the gospel in this child's life. And they also put that on display for this father who needed some help. And here's the reality, is God has allowed that relationship to remain. And they're living in the hope that relationship is going to go somewhere deep. And I am living in that hope as well. So just understand that as you do things, they take time. Don't chase the shiny objects. I know that we get anxious and we might think that things aren't working, but if you keep your hand on the plow and you be faithful to the relationships that God has given you, God will show up. And it may not lead to conversion of the life of these people, but God will show you. He will show you the fruitfulness of your effort in terms of you stay faithful, because even if nothing happens in their life where you get to see them come to know Jesus, you have remained faithful to your Creator. You have honored God by keeping your hand on the plow and being diligent regardless of the outcome. And to me, if you exhibit those characteristics as a small group or circle group, as we call it at the chapel, and you encourage people, you lead people to that sort of a paradigm, I think you'll lead well. And I hope and I pray that we will see the fruit of serious transformation in this community, in this region of Western New York. God bless you, gang. Have a wonderful day. I pray this is helpful, and I look forward to connecting with a number of you all throughout the summer and coming into the fall as well.